Ramdan, what is your dream count?
Huh? What even is that supposed to mean?
Think of it like this. How many dreams have stayed with you, shaped you?
Now, that's a powerful question.
Exactly. It might just hint at what today's book is really about. Let's get into it soon.
Welcome to Threads of Africa, a space where African voices, books, and ideas come alive. Each episode, we open the pages of books, narrations, and oral traditions that carry the wisdoms, struggles, and dreams of the continent. I'm Ramdan,
And I'm Hajar.
and together we are weaving a richer understanding of Africa, one thread at a time.
Today on Threads of Africa, we turn our gaze to one of the most powerful African literary voices of our time, Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, and her latest book, Dream Count. This is a book about sisterhood and female friendship between 4 women, all African, each with her unique personalities, issues, and life journeys.
Oh, wait. So it totally looks like our book lineup is taking a feminist turn lately. Right?
Yeah, indeed.
Oh, I'm just kidding. Anyway.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, let's see what this book talks about. And indeed, we have a lot of African authors who are feminist. Okay, so I said the book is about 4 African women. I'm gonna tell you a bit about their stories very briefly without going into detail at first. So the first protagonist is Chia. She is a romantic who is longing for a very special kind of love. She literally says in the book, she's longing for being known. So she wants someone to know her deeply inside. She's beautiful and well off, yet she lacks confidence. She is the daughter of a rich Igbo merchant, and she moved to America to become a writer.
You know, when I hear the phrase Igbo merchant, I couldn't help but smile because where I come from, that almost feels like a tautology or a redundancy.
Interesting.
Yeah, I mean, all the Igbo I knew back home are involved in some form of trade.
Yeah.
It's so deeply woven into the fabric of the culture that Igbo and merchant practically go hand in hand. But of course, I recognize that this is a biased lens. The Igbo community is a fast and dynamic community. There are incredible Igbo writers, politicians, physicians. I now have Igbo friends who are researchers or international civil servants.
Yeah.
And just look at Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie
So
herself.
she herself, she's Igbo as well, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and as you said, she's one of the most powerful literary voices in Africa. And for those of you who might not be familiar, the Igbo are one of the major ethnic groups in Nigeria.
Yeah,
making,
indeed. I think we were talking about Igbo without introducing. So yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So they make up around 18% of the population, I believe.
Okay.
So yes, while trade, commerce is a strong thread in the community, it's just one part of a much richer tapestry.
Yeah, indeed. And I think it's also curious that in every culture you always find this group of people, be it a community, a tribe, etc., that is well known for its entrepreneurial acumen. And I would assume, I mean, there is some kind of science behind it. It's basically must be driven by the skill set, capital, and network being passed on from generation to the next, and that's how this community becomes kind of an entrepreneurial community. But yeah, I mean, let's not digress too much. So let's get back to our heroines. We mentioned the first one,
Chia,
who is Chia, exactly. Now the next one in the book is Omelogor, and I hope I'm pronouncing her name right, who is her cousin, so Chia's cousin. And she is a fearless, self-made, rich lady who made a career in banking in Nigeria and currently lives in her sumptuous home in Abuja, which is the capital of Nigeria. So yeah, she lives in a big home with her servants, which sounds very fancy. She is portrayed as an iron lady, very strong, who brings a powerful support to her friends. Yet she too has her moments of weakness. The third protagonist is Zikora, who is Chia's childhood friend from school in Nigeria as well. She is the portrayal of the educated middle class who climbs the ranks thanks to education. So she moved to the US to study and become a prominent lawyer. On the other hand, her yearning to have a family and the ticking of her biological clock took her story to an exceptional and painful turn. And we will come back to that later. And last but not least, there is Kadiatou. So maybe as you can guess from the sounding of the name, it's she is a francophone, basically. She's a young lady from Guinea, whose story is the gravest of all. She goes a long way from her native village to the capital, Conakry, in Guinea, to make a living for her daughter after the death of her husband. And then she migrates to the United States, dreaming of a better future for her daughter, where she can get an education and can avoid being cut. And with cut, I mean, or is referred to female genital mutilation, which seems to be common in certain communities in Guinea. However, her dreams are shattered as she becomes a victim of rape by a powerful man, and she gets to face a justice system biased against her.
All right.
Okay, so I mentioned that this is a book about sisterhood, so back to that initial idea. The stories of the four heroines are entangled in a very interesting ways where solidarity and friendship between them comes to the forefront. About this topic, the author said in an interview to the French newspaper Le Monde, and I quote, "Women are socialized with the aim of rivaling and hating one another. That is why, when their relationships are sincere and deep, they resemble acts of courage, of resistance, revolutionary acts." End of quote.
Cool.
All right, so I think we talked a bit about Chimamanda Adichie.
Adichie.
Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. I hope I don't struggle with that again. Okay, so let us both hear a bit, as we would like to kind of talk more about her and her background. She is born in Enugu, Nigeria, and raised in Nsukka. Adichie has carved a space on the crossroads of African storytelling and global feminist thoughts. So she is known as a very powerful feminist African writer. Some of her books include Purple Hibiscus, Americana, and so on. And her novels echo the complexities of identity, migration, womanhood, and post-colonial memory. She speaks not only to Africa, but from it, refusing simplifications, reclaiming narrative, and reminding the world that storytelling is, indeed, a form of resistance. Many of you probably, like me, discovered Chimamanda through her powerful TED Talk from 2009, The Danger of a Single Story. We will link it in the notes of the podcast. All right, back to our book.
Wait. Before you move on, is that all about the author?
I don't know. You tell me.
Well, I've always been curious about Igbo names. And this is one of the perks of having some Igbo friends, right? Their names often carry deep meanings. So I did a little digging into Chimamanda's name. And it
Okay.
turns out, yeah, that Chimamanda roughly translates to "My God will never fail me." It,
Oh wow, nice. Like the whole sentence is
yeah.
Shima. Okay.
So it
Yeah.
blends Chima, meaning God knows or God will not fail, or fall, God will not fall, with Amanda, which can be interpreted as will not fail.
Okay.
And what's interesting in her case is Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie actually coined the name herself. She
What?
was, yeah,
Interesting. I did not know
yeah.
that.
So she was born Grace Ngozi Adichie,
Okay.
but in the 90s, she crafted the name Chimamanda by combining her English or Christian name, Amanda,
Mm-hmm.
with the Igbo root Chima
Okay.
to reflect both her heritage and her faith. So while it fits within traditional Igbo naming structures, it's also a name she made her own, right? And now
Yeah.
one that's recognized globally. And she recounted a beautiful story about how she came up with the name. We can reference the link to the interview for those interested.
Yeah. That's impressive. To be honest, I didn't know that she coined her name, and it's a very beautiful name indeed. Actually, and I would say that's another evidence of the vast amount of creativity and literary talent that she has.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Now back to our book. um. Yeah, I will start with what the author focuses on in her author notes at the end of the book. So Adichie basically mentions that she wrote the book after her mother passed away, finding her muse in the emotion that what raised in her after her mother's passing, obviously. In one of her interviews, she mentions that this is a book written from a place of intense grief. Yet at the same time, it's a book which has a lot of melancholy and a lot of humor, which is true, I would say. I personally did not sense the grief in the book. It's true that there are stories of lost relationships with men, mostly, given that our protagonists are women. However, what is positively surprising is that the women in the book had agency and dignity, and they did end these relationships on their terms in most of the cases, at least I could say. Adichie says in an interview that stories of Black women are not necessarily stories of pain and struggle, but also of strength, ambition, and self-determination. And that is what she tried to reflect in this novel.
Mm.
It is also important to note that this book is about contemporary women. It was hard to trace an exact timeline of the book since the narration beautifully alternates between the past and present as we progress in the book. However, my guess would be that most of the events happen over a decade between 2010 and 2020, give or take. Adichie gives an important temporal anchor, which is the COVID-19 pandemic, which happens towards the end of the story. However, actually, when you start reading the book, it is the COVID-19 is the topic of the first chapter, and that's why I mentioned that the narration is not chronologically linear, but there is a very interesting dance in the narration between past and present. So yeah, I mean, that's how kind of I could situate it between 2010 and 2020. In summary, this is a book which will speak to many of us, and it is very contemporary. And when I say us, I mean mainly African female millennials, as the heroines of the book go through the events through their 30s and early 40s. One other very important aspect to underline about the book, and that the author talks about at length in her author's note, is the story of Kadiatou. which is a fictional recounting of Nafissatou Diallo's ordeal.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So if you remember, this happened in May 2011
Yeah.
when Diallo, a Guinean immigrant, similar to Kadiatou, the fictional character, was raped by Dominique Strauss-Kahn as she was working as a cleaner in one of New York's prestigious hotels. The story has sparked outrage around sexual violence, especially against racialized women.
Okay.
Yeah. However, her case was dismissed in the criminal court as, according to the prosecutor, I quote, Diallo lied on her refugee application, which is absurd, in my opinion, to say the least. In her author's note, Adichie says, although Diallo was unlike me in many ways, she too was a West African woman living in America and therefore familiar, intuitively knowable. Sisterly feelings emerged.
Was this sentence from the book or an interview? I guess from an interview, right?
No, this was from her author's note. But yeah, she talked a lot about Diallo's stories in her interviews as well.
All right.
Yeah, and there is even an essay that she. Anyways, we will talk about it later. But yeah, she talks a lot about this story and how it touched her personally. So, building up on that thought, for the author, creating a fictional character for Diallo is a, quote, a gesture of returned dignity, a relentlessly human portrait, not an ideological one, because ideology blocks different ways of seeing and art requires many eyes, end of quote. I find this particularly powerful because when following the news or social media, we tend very often to forget that the protagonists are humans with childhoods, ambitions, circumstances, and flaws. I quote the author again from an interview this time. Journalism tells us about what happened. Fiction tells us how it felt.
I like that. And you have probably heard the saying, when a dog bites a man, that's not news. But when a man bites a dog, that is news.
Yeah.
So it's often attributed to American journalist Charles Anderson Dana, in some accounts to John B. Bogart.
Okay.
And this quote captures a key principle in journalism. Something is newsworthy when it's extraordinary, right? So I think I will build on Chimamanda's idea and say journalism tells us what's considered news within what happened, and fiction tells us what happened, what journalism left out, and how it felt.
Indeed. Yeah. So the full story, basically.
Yeah.
All right, so now shifting to the main themes of the book. And I must say, this is an enormous task to narrow down the themes. Beyond being a long narration of over 400 pages.
Wow.
Yeah. Took me time to finish it, but yeah, it was fun to read. So yeah, the book is extremely dense, multifaceted, and layered. Still all around the lives of our four heroines already introduced in the beginning of the podcast. So basically, to name a few, where we are not going to go through of them in detail, but to tell you about the density of the book. So things like police violence against Black people in the U.S., the meddling of powerful nations into African government policies, immigration and its drivers, corruption and morality, the hidden lives and desires of women in conservative environments, terrorism in the Sahel region, female genital mutilation, or also known as FGM, that we already mentioned briefly in the beginning, sexual abuse, obviously, And the list goes on and on. So you see how many themes are talked about in the book. So the book is not only fun to read, but it also brings so many deep, relevant, and contemporary reflections.
Okay.
Okay, so I mean, for the sake of the podcast, obviously we're not going to go all the themes that are mentioned in the book. So actually, I've chosen to focus on 8 themes, which I found more compelling to talk about.
I would love to know the themes that you have selected.
Okay, I will tell you. So, as I said, 8 themes. So number 1 is the African woman's voice. Number 2 is sisterhood, and we touched a bit about that in the beginning. Number 3 is love and partnership. Number 4 is motherhood. Number 5 is physical pain that women endure and that is taken for granted. Number 6, sexual violence and justice for women. Number 7, to be an African. And number 8, musings around the question of slavery.
Interesting. That's a comprehensive list, I would say.
Indeed. Okay, so let us get started. The first theme is what I call the African woman's voice. So the book is narrated in the first person for both Chia and Omelogor.
Whom you introduced in the beginning.
Exactly,
right?
yeah. So Chia, the daughter of the Igbo merchant, and Omelogor, her cousin.
Okay.
So it's narrated in the first person's voice. And there we get an intimate reveal of their thoughts and emotion as they navigate through the world. And the book is narrated in the third person for Zikora and Kadiatou, where we follow a captivating storytelling of journeys or of their journeys in their respective environment and circumstances. In either case, the book gives a voice for 4 contemporary African women and reveals their motivations and how they perceive the world around them from their different perspectives. Okay, so going to our next theme, sisterhood. And this is a topic that we already talked about a little bit in the beginning. So, sisterhood or solidarity between women. There is no single example to give here, as all 4 stories are driven by compassion and mutual support between women in general. And that does not only include the 4 protagonists, but also their wider female circles, including mothers, daughters, sisters, and friends. Maybe one telling example that I would give here is what Omelogor tells the women that she helps. So basically in the story, Omelogor is a banker based in Abuja, as we said, in Nigeria. And she is surrounded by corruption in her work everywhere. And she is even an active agent of corruption in this environment. And actually, that is a very interesting topic to reflect on, but let's not digress too much here. So, as an act of defiance or maybe redemption, she decided to steal the stolen money to set up a fund called Robin Hood. Robin written with a Y for some reason. And she was insisting on the Y in the story. So this fund will be used to help poorer women in her community in Abuja. And whenever she helps a woman, she would tell her, I quote, "The only way you will thank me is to help another woman when you can."
Okay.
Yeah. So thereby she was trying to perpetuate this virtuous circle of female solidarity. All right, so our third theme is about love and partnership. A major part of this book is about the romantic relationships that the different protagonists experience. Even the book's title, Dream Count, is actually a playful way to refer to the different lovers and or partners in Chia's universe. The woman that yearns for being known, as we said in her introduction, which basically means someone who understands her in and out. Okay, I'm not going to tell you if she ends with someone or not. Another aspect in the book talks about the African society's expectation around love and marriage. And here I would like to read this excerpt from Chia's narration, and I start my quote. The stipulations from my mother and my aunt had started in my mid-20s, firm and fine-edged, and repeated often. He must be Catholic and Igbo, have a university degree, and be able to maintain you. In my mid-30s, the conditions began to wilt at the edges. My life by then rooted in America. A Christian was fine, of any denomination, a Nigerian of any ethnicity, or an African, or just a black man, or well, a man. Now, in my mid-40s, with my female eggs in an unforgiving rush to uselessness, marriage had become secondary. Have a child, by whatever means. End of quote.
Interesting.
Yeah. So basically, this absurd transformation, although reflective of reality, brings us back to the point about the book being lighthearted and full of humor.
Yeah.
Yet, as I said, I think it's reflective of reality, and I'm pretty sure
Yeah.
a lot of African women went through
We all
similar.
identify with that, yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And again, back to love and partnerships. When the book started, all our heroines were single. And when it ended, they were, after different kinds of adventures, still single. Okay, so at the end, I told you. They ended the book all still single.
So is that a spoiler?
Yeah, spoiler. It's too late now, but you know. For some by choice, and for the others driven by circumstance,
Okay.
actually. But none of them were sad or desperate about it. As we mentioned earlier, all of these women have agency and are the drivers of their own destinies. And the next logical topic in this sequence after love and partnership is motherhood, a topic that Ngozi Adichie treats with utmost subtlety and thoughtfulness. It comes out mainly in Zikora's and Kadiatou's stories. And remember, we said earlier that the author wrote this book incited by the emotion from losing her mother after a very long involuntary break from writing.
Yeah. And her last book, Americana, came out in 2013, I think.
Yeah.
Leaving a 12-year gap before the one we are discussing today.
Exactly.
So I remember hearing her say in an interview that she hadn't felt inspired to write during those years, and that the spark only returned after her mother's passing, and it was shaped by the grief that followed. So yes, this kind of confirms what you have just said. It wasn't a voluntary pause.
Yeah, indeed. And I believe she is also softly making a tribute to her mother and motherhood through this book.
Oh, that's adorable.
Yeah. Okay, so back to the story in the book. So first, Zikora's whole story, I would argue, is driven and shaped by motherhood. Be it Zikora's desire to have a child while she is fighting against what she calls the tyranny of the biological clock, or her complex relationship with her mother, who ends up being her main supporter when Zikora's partner, Kwame, decides inexplicably to desert her once he discovers that she is pregnant.
Mm-hmm.
So on the first aspect, the fight with the tyranny of the biological clock, it becomes apparent that Zikora, while being a successful aspiring lawyer,
in the US, right?
Yeah, exactly. She had to deal with the pressures of looking for a partner to have a child with. And as we said, she was in her 30s through and beginning of 40s throughout the book. And that weighed on her considerably.
Okay.
And here I would like to quote this passage. Start of quote. By the time she considered freezing her eggs, she was in her mid-30s. I would not advise it at your age. I would advise you to start IVF to try and conceive now, the doctor said, while she nodded sagely to conceal her devastation. Try and conceive now. If she could conceive now, she would not be in this fertility clinic for a consultation about freezing her eggs. End of quote. And regarding one of her boyfriend that she calls thieves of time, Start of quote again. Zikora almost envied him this, the luxury of walking at his own pace, free of biology's historical constraints.
Well. I don't. It's not scientifically totally accurate. I think men also have
Yeah,
biological
correct. Yeah,
constraint, but yeah, let's not
yeah. But it's
go
true.
into
I
this.
think what the author is trying to
No, I
to
understand.
reflect here
Yeah.
is what kind of that society puts the pressure on
Yeah.
women and thinks that men have all the time. But as you said, science also tells us that there are constraints on men's age as well. Yeah, and the second aspect about motherhood in Zikora's story is related to her relationship with her mother, as we said, and that comes to the foreground as they bonded over her experience of giving birth.
Okay.
So the mother, a dignified, educated Igbo woman who accepted that her husband takes a second wife because he needs sons, interestingly, and she was no longer able to have children of her own after giving birth to Zikora. So Zikora explains that her father needed sons as the local inheritance law does not consider daughters eligible for inheritance. So that's also another aspect that the author is kind of hinting to. So Zikora's mother, a typical strict and infallible African mother, opened up to her daughter eventually about her first love, who was not Zikora's father, and how she hid from her husband the fact that her womb was removed after Zikora's birth to a difficult birthing, and afterwards lied about having miscarriages. And to explain better the relationship of Zikora with her mother, I would like to quote this passage here. Start of quote. Zikora, that's enough. I will go out and buy infant formula and will give him formula and he will be fine. In my time, we thought of breast milk as a supplement. I gave you formula, and did anything happen to you? Look at you. You have always been so strong. Now strong and successful. Look at you. Zikora tried to hide her surprise. Her mother thought she was strong. All she remembered were critical words like an open flame against her skin. End of quote. I find this exceptionally telling, as usually in African cultures, parents tend to communicate their high expectations from their children while rarely giving them praise. So the fact that Zikora's mother told her she is strong in this rare moment of bonding was very meaningful.
Yeah, and I see the contradiction here. Zikora's mom is the archetypal African mom, determined to see her daughter have children no matter what.
Yeah.
And at the same time, she's also confronted with her own past experiences, which ultimately brings her closer to her daughter.
Yeah.
And that's interesting. And that's an interesting dynamic to me. And speaking of giving birth, did you know that Chimamanda herself has twin boys born in 2024? Um, when she was, I think, 47.
Okay.
And she revealed in an interview that they were carried by a surrogate.
Okay.
And it appears that this happened after the interviewer complimented her on looking fantastic for someone who had just given birth. So the revelation stirred controversy, with some critics arguing that paying a poor woman to take on the risk and trauma of pregnancy on your behalf makes one a poor feminist.
Yeah, and as you said, Ngozi Adichie is a prominent feminist
Exactly.
in the African
and her
literary
response,
environment.
Chimamanda's response was bold. She said, "It matters how it's done, and I think it can be done ethically."
Yeah.
I hope that if anything good comes out of this, even the whole controversy, that more women will be less ashamed of taking or of talking about reaching motherhood through non-traditional means.
Yeah, yeah. That's an interesting topic as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So back to motherhood. Um, I've also mentioned that motherhood was a central place in Kadiatou's story, and that manifests in her relationship with her daughter.
Okay, Kadiatou is the lady from Guinea who. Um, did you mention how she's related to Chia or Zikora in the book?
Yeah, good question, actually. I mean, as we said, all four heroines have, or their stories are entangled. So Kadiatou basically came to know Shia as and her family when they stayed in the hotel she was working in as a maid. So we said Kadiatou immigrated to the U.S. as a refugee, and basically to earn a living, she was working as a maid in different hotels, and happened to meet Chia and her family in one of the hotels she was working. And then basically they connected over their shared Africanity. Later, Shia asked Kadiatou to come work in their home in the U.S. to help her with the housework. So basically, she was supporting them in the housework in their home. Yeah. Yeah. So back to the story. Since Kadiatou's daughter's birth, her own life orbits mainly around providing the best life for her. She migrates to the US to enable her to have a decent education. She works very hard to provide a livelihood and ensure stability for her. Once the whole turmoil starts around the case of sexual assault, Kadiatou's paramount concern is not to risk being deported so that her daughter doesn't lose the opportunity she had in the US. So her daughter is always in the center of her mind. Without wanting to spoil the ending of Kadiatou's story, I would say her love for her daughter and her daughter's support seems to be the only silver lining she had throughout her ordeal. All right, so now moving to the next themes. This and the next one will be the tough ones. I would like to mention the physical pain that women endure and that is taken for granted as the theme that I would like to talk about right now. It's not something central to the book, but it comes in different manifestations, and I thought it's worth mentioning. I believe the most brutal two scenes in the book are first the sexual assault scene, which I will come back to in the next theme, and the cutting scene of Kadiatou and her sister Binta. So cutting, as we said, is female genital mutilation. And this is a practice which is still, unfortunately, a common practice in some African communities, especially in rural areas. And as you can imagine, it leads to all kinds of complications that the women have to endure, from the pain of the operation itself. And I mean, it's not really an operation, it's just done at home with a blade by an aunt or some other women from the family, to all kinds of infection and all kinds of issues related to the women's sexual lives later. Other types of pain that the book talks about, which are more natural and less man-made, include Zikora's birth scene, which the author describes with the utmost detail and credibility, including the physical and emotional struggles that the protagonist goes through. And to be honest, it's interesting that you say that the author didn't really give birth, because that scene was so much detail that I thought she was describing her own.
No, she did.
Oh, she did. Okay.
Yeah, she did. Her firstborn, I think.
Oh, okay. Understood. Yeah, because that scene was it felt extremely realistic. There is additionally the description of Binta's first period. So Binta is Kadiatou's sister, which was very painful. It turns out later that Binta has growths in her womb. These most probably refer to uterine fibroids, a disease similar to endometriosis, which was obscure and unknown until very recently. Have you ever heard about this?
Yeah, I think so.
Fibroids.
Yeah.
Yeah. Actually, I don't know if you've seen this in social media recently. Kenyan actress Lupita Nyong'o
Oh, yeah.
posted about it
Yeah.
in her social media accounts, and the fact that she got diagnosed with them and undergone surgery to remove them. And I appreciate that she shared this as it raises awareness around this condition, which statistically has a disproportionate impact on women from African descent. And of course, we do need more research on these diseases that touch only women. One last topic under this theme is a condition that Chia had, and I personally did not know about. It's called premenstrual dysphoric disorder, PMDD.
That sounds complicated.
Yeah. And that is a more severe form of the premenstrual syndrome that is more known, PMS. Yeah, and to describe that, I will leave you with this quote.
You love quotes.
Yeah, I do. Okay, startup quote. I had told him how a doctor finally gave me a name for a horror I'd lived with for years. Suffering, really suffering, a few days every month. My mind mute with self-loathing. My bloated body drained of energy and hope. Premenstrual dysphoric disorder. End of quote. That was Chia talking to one of her boyfriends. Okay, so now we come to the grimmest theme of all, sexual violence and justice for women. Although a lot more is happening in the book beyond the sexual assault that Kadiatou endures, we sense from the author's interviews around the book that this is a crux of the story to her. As we said, she talks a lot about Diallo and how she felt about the whole incident and how this book kind of is a tribute to her. And obviously, it's needless to say that sexual assault is a violent crime. But going through all of the emotions that Kadiatou went through, it makes it even more taxing. So from feeling dehumanized by the act itself and having to recount it again and again, having her privacy invaded by the press, fearing for her life and her daughter's safety against the importance of the attacker.
Yeah, you mentioned the attacker briefly at the beginning, but didn't say who he was. His name is Dominique Strauss-Kahn, and at the time he was the director of the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, and was widely expected to become the next French president before the entire sexual assault scandal broke out.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So back to the book story. Beyond the crime, we sense that the author's critique is towards the justice system in the U.S. And how it is practiced, and most importantly, how minorities, in this case, an immigrant African woman, are disadvantaged by design. And this is reflective also of Diallo's story, as we said in the beginning. So the first aspect of the critique is with regards to what I would call the commercialization of the legal system in the United States. It feels that money stands in the foreground before justice. When I say justice, it's in the first sense of fairness or moral rightness. For example, when Kadiatou's colleague, Lynn, is comforting her, she says, "In America, justice is money. You don't see how they celebrate big money judgments? This man attacked you, so you deserve American justice, money." So basically, money is equal, or justice is equal money. The second aspect of the critique is related to the systemic bias against people like Kadiatou. So, as we mentioned, Kadiatou is from Guinea, so English is not a native language to her. She also didn't go to school, so her knowledge of English is limited to what she picked when she went to the US. When the prosecutor, who is supposed to be on her side of the case, actually, was interviewing her, we can clearly sense that a lot is being lost in translation. And even when they thought to bring a Pular interpreter, so Pular is her native language, the latter spoke a different dialect of Pular, so she only added to the confusion and the miscommunication. At the end, although the evidence of a non-consensual sexual encounter was proven, the prosecution decided to dismiss the case under the pretext that Kadiatou lied on her asylum application, which is, by the way, the exact same thing which happened to Nafissatou Diallo.
Yeah, again, just to be clear, Nafissatou Diallo, because you have been alternating between Kadiatou and Nafissatou Diallo.
True.
Nafissatou Diallo is the real life person whose story inspired the character of Kadiatou.
Exactly.
And the real world assailant was Dominique Strauss-Kahn, or DSK. He was the then president of the IMF.
Yeah.
But did you know that DSK, Dominique Strauss-Kahn, was married at the time to Anne Sinclair, a wealthy, well-known French journalist and heiress who firmly supported him throughout the entire legal ordeal. And in fact, she posted approximately 6 million in bail, 6 million US dollars, including 1 million US in cash, and even paid for ongoing security and housing costs. So it also emerged that DSK himself wasn't as financially independent as one might expect,
Okay.
for the president of IMF. But hey, this isn't about DSK, right? I'm just curious what Chimamanda, as a feminist, what would be her take on Anne Sinclair's role in all of this.
Yeah. I mean, it's a complex situation to be in.
Yeah.
Yeah, by the way, there is an interesting Netflix series about a similar situation, i.e., a wife of a man who is accused of rape, and actually he did rape another woman, and then how she dealt with the whole story. I think the series name is the series name is The Anatomy of a Scandal. I remember it. Anyway, so back to Diallo and or Kadiatou and the justice system. Using Chimamanda's words from an interview, start of quote, what we're saying to women that if you ever expect to get justice for sexual assault, then you better be perfect. End of quote. By the way, the author wrote an essay about Diallo's case in 2011, where she criticizes all of the aspects that came again in the novel. We will link that in the podcast notes as well. All right, so now we move to the next, hopefully lighter theme. I would like to call this one To Be an African. And here, the focus is on the Western perspective, since all four heroines live to a certain extent in the US. It comes out clearly through Chia's story that the imagination of some people in the West, an African person is a precarious person in need of help. So more detail to that. Chia is, as we said, this lady from a very rich Nigerian family. She lives in the US in her parents' luxurious house. Her parents are based in Nigeria, but she's the only one who lives in that house. And she has a maid, etc. So basically a very luxurious life. and you can imagine all of the comforts. Her aspiration is to write a travel book which reflects her own perspective about travel as she travels the world to various destinations and writes about it. And yeah, well, actually, one aspect that she talks about a lot is her Nigerian passport and how difficult it is to get visas. Anyway, at one point, she finished her book and finally found a publisher who was interested, and she called the book The Non-Adventurous Adventures of One African Woman. And she sent it to the publisher. The publisher's reply is so absurd that it sounds funny. She suggested to Chia to first write a more relevant book to create the buzz. And with relevant, she meant something around the struggles in Congo or Sudan, as people will buy it to, quote, show they care, even if they don't read it.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, and here I quote, I like quotes. I quote Chia's conversation with her partner, start of quote, I want to write light, funny takes on travel. And to her, I'm just an African who should write about struggles. The problem is that many of these white people don't think we also dream, he said. End of quote. Other anecdotes in this story show that this perception is not limited to white people, as mentioned in this instance, but also extends to African Americans. So in this extract, Darnell, one of Chia's boyfriends, is talking about his lawyer friend who is filing immigration papers pro bono for an African family. Start of quote.
Again?
Bear with me. A real African family, not like yours. As if affluence made African impurely African. End of quote. In another context, Omelogor is commenting on a similar behavior. Start of quote. They can't stand rich people from poor countries because it means they can't feel sorry for you. End of quote. Okay, so we're coming to our 8th and last theme of today. And this one I would like to call Musings around the question of slavery. Musings because slavery is not really a core topic in the book, nor it is treated at length. But there are some discussions there and here between the characters which touch on the question of slavery. So Darnell, this African American guy we talked about earlier, once said to one of his friends, start of quote, you know, Shia's people probably sold my people. She comes from old Igbo money, going back centuries. It wasn't just palm fruit they sold to white folks on that West African coast.
Oh, interesting. And what do you think about that quote?
I don't know if in reality this type of conversation does take any dimensions in conversation between descendants of victims of the slave trade and the descendants of Africans who participated in the slave trade.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, Ramdan, if you can share your thoughts about this.
Yeah, I mean, this is a real point of contention between descendants of Africans who were enslaved on the American continent and those who remained in Africa. In Benin, for instance, there is a city where some people are descended both from enslavers and from formerly enslaved people who returned from the Americas and went on to facilitate the trade themselves. So you see, it's a complex and layered history, but yeah, I don't think we have the time to fully unpack it in today's episode.
Yeah, indeed. Hopefully we should find a book around this specifically and talk about it in one of the future episodes. Anyway, another idea I found in the book, which is relatively close to this one, it was floated by Omelogor by introducing the concept of a hierarchy.
I'm wondering if it's Omelogor. Omelogor.
Yeah.
Was there an accent?
Accent? No. Yeah. And you remember I asked you about accents in Nigerian dialects.
Well, if there is any Igbo among our listeners, please let us know how to pronounce Omelogor.
Indeed. So yeah, I mean, she was talking to other characters in the book, and she introduced the concept of a hierarchy in different slave trading schemes, which is kind of interesting to say the least. As according to her, enslaving people used to exist even before the European transatlantic slave trade. In other words, some African tribes or kingdoms would take slaves from other tribes, for example, as spoils of war. And I quote her words from the book here. One system was much more barbaric than the other. That's a fact. Igbo slave traders could never have imagined the transatlantic slave trade because it was nothing like the slavery they knew. The Europeans and Americans industrialized slavery. They turned people into things, like bits of wood. A piece of wood can never be part of your family. A piece of wood can never be human. In Igbo land, a slave was still human. End of quote. So I think this idea is a reminder that slavery existed before the transatlantic slave trade, but the Europeans and Americans took it to another level of cruelty and dehumanization.
I would say just the Europeans. But I don't believe any form of slavery can ever be justified. But that's a topic for another
Yeah,
day.
indeed. I totally agree with you. All right, so with this, I would like to close our talk today. Obviously, there is much more depth and richness to this book that it's difficult to give it justice in a podcast, in addition to being suspenseful and fun to read. So I definitely encourage you to check out Dream Count by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening, and hopefully it wasn't too long.
And so we close our journey through Dream Counts, a novel that pulses with moral clarity and righteous fury, a feminist tapestry stitched from humor, grief, ambition, betrayal, and the hope women carry for one another. If this story sparked something in you, pass it on, just like oral tradition. You have been listening to Threads of Rifrikia with Hamdan and Hajer. À bientôt and stay curious.